Well, thank you. It's lovely to see so many of you that I recognize and remember. I should say the other way, remember and recognize. And I'm sure there are some of you who I should remember better than I'm doing. So please just come and say hello if you think I should. Heather told me that there's some sort of format here that you're supposed to say how you got here or whatever. And I think Grant probably covered that when he talked about during the war, Dad joining the Navy and coming to Victoria. And then I was 4 when after the war, and they bought the place out in Royal Oak, just down the hill. So there we go. So some of you may remember Peter Zosky's show, The Years of This Country in the Morning on CBC, and then Judy LaMarche, who did the Judy Show for, I don't know, 1 or 2 years or whatever. So the genesis of this piece that I'm going to present to you was read on March the 3rd of 1976 on the Judy Show on CBC Morning Radio from Toronto, following a request to the listeners for across the country to call in with the tales of their childhood. So when Judy said that on the radio, I just sat down and started writing. And so as I say, it was read. They asked me to read it. So I've expanded it for this presentation. So it's quite longer, but I listened to Grant's video, and I was mightily entertained by it, and I learned quite a bit about it that I hadn't heard before. But my sister said they hadn't either, heard some of these things. But I'm not going to talk nearly as long as he did. So anyhow. I remember the old Royal Oak School, 2 brown wooden buildings with the washrooms in the basement of the larger one, the carpenter's shop near the school gates, behind which a favored grade 5 boys would hang out with the grade 6s. What went on there is still a mystery to me. Morning glory hung on the back fence, and sweet clover encroached on the rough plain fields. Each day we were called to classes by the ringing of the handbell by the principal, Mrs. Welsh, and sometimes by a chosen student. The large building has long since disappeared. We lived in the large 2-story house at the corner of West Saanich and Markham Roads, now over 100 years old. And I walked the mile to and from school each day, usually with Bish and Singh and one of the Chew girls. We spent grade 1 and 2 in the small 1-room building, now Crumsby's. Grade 3 and 4 were in the larger building, which I thought was a big place, but Heather tells me it was only 2 classrooms, an office and a basement. The perspective of childhood. An interesting note is that the washrooms were in the large building, and during grades 1 and 2, we had to run across the schoolyard. No supervision, no one seen us, to see where we'd gone, anyone else around. No one ever disappeared, but that situation would never be acceptable today. I know the strap was kept hanging on the back of the door in a closet in the office because I was asked to get it one day. An implied threat never carried out, thankfully. It would have scarred me for life. I remember being chastised in grade 1 because I selected a book from a bookcase along the wall. There were sets of small books, so shiny and new, very appealing. But I was reading it, not permitted. We were not at that level book yet. The bright new school with its electric bills was completed when I was in grade 5. There were still 2 grades in each room. Mr. Wilway was our new principal. He had been in the war, and he had a wooden hand. He also claimed to have engraved his name with a penknife in the back of the royal throne. We were all impressed. While the school was under construction, some of us explored the inside. Where's Bonnie? Playing hide and seek. Where are we? Yes. And the favorite place was the cupboards in the rear of the rooms, which we thought was quite novel. Outside on the eastern edge of the property, the remnants of the old VNS railway could be seen. The annual school picnic hike to Beaver Lake was along Pipeline Road, where some of us would pluck and eat salmon berries as we walked, against dire warnings from others that they thought they were poisonous. Later in the summer, we added huckleberries to our snack. The rusty, caved-in water supply pipes could be walked along in places. heavy undergrowth with large, shiny skunk cabbages in the trickle of the creek, prickly berry bushes, mysterious woods noises, and our wild imaginations often hurried us along. The abandoned reservoirs that used to supply water to Victoria were near the lake, cracked and crumbling, filling up with grasses and bushes, into which the more daring boys descended, and some even sped their bikes around the curved sides as if they were in a circus. I would not go down into them, afraid I might not be able to get out again. After a swim in the lake, with a shaky mixture of bravery and timidity, we might venture into Sadler's concession building to spend a dime. It was here the big guys played the jukeboxes and the slot machines. I recall my mother telling me to stay away from the concession building. Her instructions, no doubt, must have had something to do with the boys, because I didn't have a dime or any money for the slot machines. The hot, dusty walk home with mosquitoes buzzing and iridescent dragonflies whirring about us always seemed longer than our hike up to the lake. Once we were in junior high, a warm spring meant that we were excused from school before the end of June to help harvest an early berry crop further out the peninsula. I don't recall that I earned much money at this, but it was possible apparently. I remember Jerry Miller bought herself a nice new bike with her earnings. Our sports teams played basketball, volleyball, badminton, and softball against the Mount Newton and North Saanich high schools. This was exciting, and it was an adventure to ride the school buses to and from the games. At least it was for those of us who never rode them otherwise. Do you remember? 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer, until the driver couldn't stand it any longer. At Orchard Store at the corner of West Saanich and Wilkinson Roads, people used charged accounts and could phone in an order to be delivered. Charlie Orchard would deliver. Quick knock, walk in, and unpack the boxes on our kitchen table. He knew our mother was probably busy with the baby. At Stinson's nearer the school, kids could buy cigarettes and even smoke them in the rear of the store. Venturing into that store was an ordeal for many of us, under the staring eyes of the older kids, the boys really, who probably thought it was funny, making us feel uncomfortable. They made me nervous, although I was never sure why. The Women's Institute Hall, where women took lessons to make wallets and purses out of leather, where wedding receptions, bazaars, and magic shows were held, where we learned to square dance, and we performed our school Christmas concerts, was a focal point of the community. I'll never forget the time the heavy red velvet curtain rolled down, hitting Scrooge, Chris Searle, in the head, and the time a neighbor boy offered to place his head under the magician's blade. That ended well, or I would have remembered that too. Summers were spent weeding the garden, swimming, pansy seed and berry picking, and babysitting. I learned to hit a ball in our front yard, and sometimes there were enough kids around for a pickup softball game up at the school. We didn't go away on vacations, we amused ourselves, and were happy when September rolled around once again. My father had a boat moored at the Oak Bay Marina. I would gladly get up very early to go fishing with him, learning how to bake the hook with the tiny fish we caught on the fish rake and catch and reel in a fish. I remember my first big one, insisting I could get it in on my own. Dad and his friend Ray really wanted to take over the rod, but I did it. After returning home the first time I ever caught a fish, I started up the back stairs to the house. Dad called out, "Where do you think you're going? Get down here and clean your fish. You caught it, you clean it." So, lesson learned. Winters were sometimes cold enough to skate at Quick's Pond, with bonfires at night and large groups of people who had driven out from Victoria to skate. Our Uncle Blair lived with us for a year while he was attending Victoria College. One particularly cold and snowy winter, he and a friend built an igloo in our front yard. They had a small fire inside to melt the ice and have it refreeze, making the igloo very solid. It was large enough for them to get into, too. Royal Oak was Sunday school and friends and neighbors, harvest dinner, a trip into the woods across the road past the Scout Hall to cut our own Christmas tree, trips into Victoria for shopping, the May 24th parade, and swimming lessons at the Crystal Gardens on Monday nights. Saturday mornings, we paid 25 cents each for art lessons at Mrs. Hobbs, where we drew and painted and used clay, throwing pots on a wheel, driven by an old pedal sewing machine in the yard. Royal Oak Shopping Centre. What a concept. A number of stores all together. While in high school, I worked in Crosby's drugstore. The Orchards took over the supermarket. My brother Neil worked there, packing groceries and taking them out to the cars. No doubt he did other work there as well. He once brought home a couple of overripe avocados. I had never heard of them before. One day, I overheard him telling Mom that he had finally asked for a raise, and he was told he didn't need one as he didn't have a family to support. Things were different in those days. Halloween, apples, bonfires, and later at night, the church bells ringing. And Dad would say, I bet that was so-and-so again this year. So that was something we always listened for. When are the church bells going to ring tonight? Memories return. The urgent whispers called to the frosty windows to watch a family of deer helping themselves in our garden in the faint light of an early morning. The times we children were kept indoors while our father, with our cocker spaniel in tow, went down the fields to the pond to shoot a pheasant or a duck for our dinner. Picking blackberries and gathering some windfall apples so Mum could make my favorite pie. The thrill of learning to milk the cows. Riding our old white horse Pussy. The excitement when a raccoon found his way onto our side porch one night to where we slept outside in the summertime. The lovely swans in flight on their way from the swamp, known as Quick's Pond then, to Beaver Lake. The fragrance of my mother's lilacs. The lowing of the cows, and the clucking of the chickens when an egg was laid. Royal Oak was the place where we entertained ourselves, where we were freer than the children in the city in the sense that we could ride our bikes along long country roads and go for hikes over large tracts of field and forest, climb trees, write a book in the hayloft, find Easter lilies and lady slippers, shooting stars and tiger lilies, and once even a trillium in the woods across the street, and sell them at a stand on the road, catch sunfish and crayfish, and watch the salmon spawn in Colquitt's Creek, where it passes under West Saanich Road. My older brother, Grant, had a morning paper route for a time. Occasionally, I took it over for a month to earn some money for myself. The papers were picked up at the front door of the municipal hall. Many will recall the police station on the lower level. What I most remember, and I still have the vision in my head, was riding my bike down Wilkinson Road early one morning with the clear rays of the sun shining through the trees. Mystical and magical. The rest of the world touched us very little compared to what our children and grandchildren are aware of through television today. Many days after an event, we would get news of a terrible flood on the Yangtze River or a devastating earthquake in some faraway place, although we didn't realize it at the time. For a child growing up, it was filled with innocence and wonder and beauty. Thank you. Any questions? Did it bring back any memories for any of you? Good. Yeah. So you frequented Simpsons, did you?
Yes, yeah, we did. We went there lots, yeah.
Yeah.
Who was it previous to Simpsons? Pimlocks.
Was it Pimlocks?
Yeah, I think it was Pimlocks before that. Either Pimlocks was before or after Simpsons. I'm not sure who was first.
Well, was that Mary Lou Pimlock's family?
It'd be Pimlocks for sure because they had Pimlocks and then, I'm not sure what order, whether Simpsons were first and it was.
Thank you. I remember I had a birthday party once and you gave me a lacrosse ball to play. I still remember. I was thrilled to bits. What did we do? 1, 2, 3, Ilario? Remember that? Yes. I often thought it was hard for Mom because we live so far away from kind of anybody or anything. So the PDA, the Institute Hall when she went there when I was much younger, and the telephone. Spend a lot of time on the telephone, but I thought, well, that's the way she's doing her visiting. You know, she can't go to these people's homes and talk. And then also the fairs, I guess, that they had. And there would be, Mom would be baking up a storm. She made the mince pies, and she'd lattice all the top, and I can remember Dad coming home once saying, well, I guess not any of that's for us, is it? So, but, yeah.
Tell us more about growing up in such a big family.
With one bathroom, you mean?
all the funny stuff.
Oh my gosh.
She was the funny stuff.
Yeah, well, it was 2 levels and a basement. And I remember when I was old enough, I guess that, you know, another baby comes along, you have to get shifted somehow. And so then I was in a bedroom upstairs, and it was chilly up there. We had a furnace that had big chunks of wood, and Dad would stoke it up, and then he'd get up in the morning and build it up again. So it was the forced heating kind of thing. But it was fine. I think it was fun. I think it was fun. Yeah, and it was wonderful with all these little brothers and sisters and babies to look after.
One special little brother.
I had 2 little brothers.
Okay.
Yeah. The little one. Yes. The one bathroom, I mean, people now need 3 and 4 bathrooms in a house. Like, don't they cooperate? You know, so we sort of, you hurry up. How much longer are you going to be? I can't wait. You know, that.
Sheldon Cooper list.
What's that?
Sheldon Cooper list off Big Bang. His bathroom schedules.
Oh, yeah.
Watch the Big Bang.
No, I don't know that. I don't know that one.
We had a bath
What?
thing where we had our bath, and I think the older ones got the bath first, because I was down at I always got the dirty water.
Really? Go on. You're making that up.
But the bathtub was huge.
Yeah.
And you could get scrunched down at one end and then just push like crazy and get a big ride back to the end of your knee.
Yeah. We had an orchard that was there, established when we bought the place, and the pear trees weren't doing so well. They were a little bit scabby, but so nothing was really done about that. But we had a wonderful Gravenstein apple tree, and as Mom said, that kept us going all winter. We'd have boxes and boxes of apples, and they were kept in a very dark place under the porch. If this was our house, we had a front porch, and then it came way down the side. And at the back, so this was the backyard, there was a door where you could go in and you could walk all the way through. Well, there was no light or anything. There were spiders, and it was, you know. So the boxes would be on boards, so they were off the ground all the way along. And Mom would give us a colander or something and said, go down and get some apples, please. So you'd gingerly put your hand in and hope it wasn't in a squishy spot. Because we didn't, I don't know why, we didn't take a flashlight to look. We'd just go down and get some apples. Do you want the Kings or the Gravensteins, sort of thing. And then with the fellow who owns the house now, phoned Heather one day apparently and said that the wind had blown over our Gravenstein, which was very, very old. And she went down and took pictures of it. And I hope something was made with the wood.
He made a bench out of the main truck.
Yeah. And I feel I spent half my life up a tree. And I think the poor kids now that don't have trees to climb in their backyard, and, you know, try to go a little bit higher and swing off a branch. And I don't know, we must have learned things when we were doing that kind of play.
And you play for hours without supervision. Like you take off in the
No.
Everybody played outside.
Dad would say, go out and get in that sunshine.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Christmas was wonderful. We'd always have a huge tree, and the stockings were hung, and get up in the morning, and there they were. We could have our stockings, and that was it. Nothing else until we were dressed and we'd had breakfast. Then we would all go in, and the presents would be distributed, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then kind of start out. There was none of this going to the tree, and it's got my name on it, rip it open, that I understand some families do these days. I don't know what's coming over people. Yeah, so, yeah, the bathroom was an issue. But we had a long table, this sort of thing, with a bench on either side, and Mom's chair at the end. So we all fit in, and usually a high chair at that corner. Another thing was we didn't have automatic washer and dryer, a wringer washer, and rinsing them in the tub, and then you take the basket of them and go up the stairs and hang them on the long clothesline. And honestly, bringing them in sometimes, we'd be bringing in diapers, and they'd all be like this, stiff as a board, and your fingers were cold. And so it wasn't easy. When I look back and think how hard people worked too, compared to what we do today. But I suppose it's different because we're still all busy, and yet we're just doing different things. We're not doing the laborious things of looking after our house, beating carpets, that sort of thing. I don't know, what do you think about it? But the sunlight dappled through the... Yes, it was lovely. And the noises. It was the concession, but Sadler's owned it. And then one night there was a fire.
Yes.
It was tragic.
It was a very tragic story.
Yes.
I was just going to say that things were different then, and we always had to do housework and stuff, and it didn't matter whose house you were at. Like if I was at your house, I pitched in and did stuff with their kids that they were supposed to do, and if people came to our house, the same thing. And I can always remember beating the carpets was one of the things that we had to do at one person's house, but we always made games out of stuff like that. And my girlfriend's mom had hardwood floors, and she used to face glass them, and it was before the days of the electric polishers, and we'd all be handed woolen socks and told to run across the floor.
I remember that.
Across the
Yeah.
floor and streaking and stuff
Yeah.
to get the floors all
We'd
shut.
wrap the cloths
All game.
around our feet and go like this, and then back again. And
Woolen socks that we used to go across the floor.
yeah,
My mom had I've still got it actually, it's almost like it's cast iron, heavy thing. And you put a broom handle on it, and she'd sweep it across the floor with rags, and that's how she polished the floor.
oh my,
Very heavy. I've still got it at home, yeah.
that would be an antique.
Oh, yeah, she did, yeah.
Why didn't you bring it for a whatnot?
Yeah, it actually, it's still in good shape, like I actually, she used it a lot. She put it, I think it had bristles on it, and then she was scrubbing it with it, I think, and then she put cloth on it and try and polish, the linoleum or whatever.
The handle in it had a swivel on it.
Yeah, I've still got it. Yeah. I was gonna use it for a doorstop, but I couldn't even lift it.
Yeah, that would be big. When you say doorstop, I immediately thought of the irons that were put on stoves to heat. When you said that, now they're sold as antiques, and you can pay a penny for them. Yeah. I have a little story, because you asked about memories of Grant Sheldrake, and I'm not going to be here. But I remember when I was quite young, I don't know if I was 6. Anyhow, I was up there, and they were looking after me, and I don't remember which of my brothers or sisters might also have been there. And what was Grant's older brother's name? Lynn, yes. Well, they also had an electric fence, I guess, with cows on the other side, and he was a big guy, and he said, touch the fence. I said, no, I'm not going to touch it. Why? It's okay. You can touch it. He went like that. And I thought, oh, okay. So that was a shock. And then at lunchtime, I suppose it was, I went in and we were to have lunch. I said, what'll I do with my gum? And Mr. Sheldrick said, oh, put it behind your ear. So I did. Hi, Dee. So anyhow, they had to cut my hair off to get the gum out. That's what I remember. Yeah. And so that's about it. It was funny, this wasn't nearly as long, of course, to read on the radio when other people were doing it. And so one night I sat down and I thought, because all these other ideas were coming to my head. And then on the ferry, I'm starting to pencil things in. And then this morning I thought, oh, I'm going to change this. So it's a fun exercise to do, to remember back then, as long as you can still remember yesterday and last week and the month before. It gets like
Can you
that.
tell us something to embarrass Heather?
Well, that can go two ways. So
I can cut her out of the video.
oh, well, now that you put it that way. Yeah, no, I don't know anything embarrassing to say about Heather.
Can I say one memory?
Yes.
It's one of the little sisters. I don't know what the event was, maybe it was graduation or something, of dance. And I remember I don't know how many people, but it just seemed like a huge group of people came into the house, I guess, to pick Heather up or to get Heather. And all the girls were dressed in their beautiful dresses. And I don't know that I remember any boys, because I was just absolutely smitten with these beautiful dresses that all the girls were wearing to the dance. And now, today, I would kill to have dresses like those dresses. And was it Blondine that came in that beautiful turquoise dress? I don't remember. You know what I'm talking about. It was just like every fairy princess tale had come true. All these girls were going to the dance all dressed up in their dresses.
This is obviously our younger sister, Lorna. She's quite a bit younger than I am. Yes. It's interesting what we remember from when we were really small, too. And we all remember things a little bit differently because of the different perspective.
The three of us have completely different stories of the same event.
Well, my kids do the same thing. They'll say something, and I'll say, I don't remember that. Mom, how could you forget that? And then I would say something, they say, that didn't happen. So it's just what we pick up on.
You were saying about the one bathroom.
Yes?
What about the summertime with the wooden coal stove, when you didn't want to turn the wooden coal stove on because it was too hot to have a stove on, but you had no water to have a bath in if you didn't put the stove on, because that's what the
Yeah. We had a sawdust burner. And the sawdust was blown in through a window in the basement to the far end. And so before going to school, we would go down and fill up the sawdust bucket and put it on the landing at the top of the basement stairs for Mom. And that's what kept our stove going, was the sawdust.
But then the stove would keep the water.
That's right, the water heater was in the corner. I don't know, Mom always cooked wonderful meals. We had a drying rack that Dad built, I think, and it was probably about this size with bars on it, and there was a pulley device on the wall, and you let it down and hang these clothes that had come in from outside that weren't dry yet, what we were going to do with them. So anyhow, they were all hung on there, and you had the pulley, and you get it up so it was above head height, and that's how the clothes got dried inside. Yeah.
Yeah, I was breaking long seals to fly over the clothesline when it was up.
Yeah. So, anything else? That's about it. Oh, you haven't got that on now, do you?
Well, this is the good part.
Yeah. It's all in there somewhere. I think of it as a filing system, and you just have to find out which file it's in, and it's there.
You
yes.
mentioned Grant Sheldrake and clothes drying racks. Some of you will remember, some of you won't. In his oral history, he tells a story about clothes drying rack. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to his oral history.
Okay.
I think everyone should try to watch that again now.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I watched it and it was just amazing. I'm so glad we have it on. Yeah, that's an idea.
This is really a wonderful organization that you have going here, and have with the website and so much information on it, and then to put the speakers on, and so those of us who either were not here or don't live here, to be able to listen to these people, and it's good. I haven't listened to them all. Some of them are quite long and take a while, but always interesting, always good. And I don't know, I didn't know Grant was that funny. Did you? I mean, he telling stories and
You've read it?
yes, yeah. Never thought he talked very much.
I think he was.
Oh gosh, I left after graduation. I got married, moved to Calgary, lived there for 15 years. Thought I was just going for a year or two, and then of course we'd be back at the coast. And then children came along and they're in school, and you realize this is home. Get involved in the community and kind of civic affairs and that kind of thing. And feel you kind of have a handle on your community and Calgary as a larger entity. And then my husband was offered a job back here, so we finally got back to the coast. And my grandparents lived in Burnaby, and everybody else on the island. Grant was here too. So that was 1975 that we moved back here. And I don't know, I started going to college when I was in Calgary, and then I continued it here. And then one day I was taking a course a semester kind of thing. And then one day my daughter said to me, "Mom, you're going to be ready to retire by the time you finish." And that's all it took. So I went to UBC full-time and got a degree, and then did a year of graduate work, and got kind of burned out. Learned how to type so I could get a job. I never thought I'd have to type. Somebody would do it for me. And then what did I do? I worked for a computer company for a few years till it went into bankruptcy. I could see it coming. I thought the salespeople were always lazy, just standing around talking to one another. And the boss didn't do anything about it. I don't think he saw it happening. And so then I joined Mutual Life of Canada. I sold life insurance and investment. I got my investment funds license and did that for about 4 years or so. And then I got involved in, I was asked to join Rotary by a fellow who was one of my clients, but I also knew him from a board I was on. And he asked me for lunch one day and then said, what do you do when you're not working? You belong to any service clubs? And I said, no. Why? He says, well, I'd like to invite you to join Rotary. And I said, isn't that a men's club? He says, well, yes, it is. And I thought it was time it changed. He said, and so I'm asking you. And then one of the fellows who worked for the city was asking another woman, and he said, if you'll both come one morning, the same morning, and so that you're introduced and see what you think. So Lucy and I both went the same morning, and most of the fellows came up, shook our hands, said, really glad to meet you, I'm so glad you've come. But there were these guys over in the corner. They never approached us at all, so we knew there was a little bit of hesitation. So in joining Rotary, one day, one of the fellows said he met some fellows from LaConner, and they talked about going down for a casual hello visit across the border kind of thing. So a bunch of us went down one evening, and it was funny. They had a 50-50, and Lucy and I both won the draws, and it wasn't fixed. It was just funny. They thought that's enough having women in the club. And a fellow talked about a film project between the Russians and the Americans, and it was started by a friend of his who lived in Sedro-Woolley, and he was a filmmaker kind of guy, and he went over with a delegation of women to film what they were doing. And they were in Stockholm? And then they were going to fly on to Moscow. And Chernobyl blew up. And some of them were going, and some of them wouldn't. Anyhow, he went. And while he was there, he talked to the people at the #1 films place in Moscow, forgotten what it's called. And he proposed that they have a film crew and come to the Skagit Valley and do a film. They would do it together, and then they would go to Soviet Armenia, which was Stan's grandmother. She was from Armenia. And they would do a film there. They would edit them together, produce them together, and show them together, so you see a film half and half. And I thought, that's fabulous. That's the way to see others, to see ourselves as others see us. And I was just really, this zinged something in me. So I found him and talked to him afterwards. And so he took my name and phone number, and then a woman phoned, and she said, "You're the Canadian who's interested in this. Come on down to KCTS. We're having a meeting in the, what is it, London Lumber Company. Starts with W. Weinhauser? No, that's not.
Warehouser.
Yeah, what?
Warehouse.
Warehouse. Yeah. Anyhow, in their boardroom. And so I thought, this sounds like fun. This is when I was selling life insurance. So I could do whatever I liked in the day. So scooted down there, and I managed to find KCTS. I met these people. It was great. So we started a foundation. I was the only Canadian on the board. And this went along. And then the Soviet Peace Fund, because there was some communications back and forth with Stan's work, and they invited us to take a delegation to Russia. And all we had to do was get there and get ourselves home again. And so we sent out letters to Rotary clubs. I sent out letters to Rotary clubs talking about this, and if there was anybody interested to let us know and send us their CV, their references kind of thing. And so we got these and sat around and decided who we would choose to go with us. So 12 of us went. And that was pretty exciting. It was bloody marvelous, actually. I took a Russian course before I went, so I'd know a little bit. And we were met at the airport. We were all given roses, only they don't take the prickles off them when they're going. So there were all these prickles on the roses. Put us up in a hotel. The lights in this big lobby were only half on, and we had to give our passports. That's what they do there. You give your passport, and you get it when you leave again. They took us around to so many places to talk with people, have them talk to us. We had meetings kind of all over the place. And we went to Byelarussia, too, to Minsk, on an overnight train. We were there for probably a week. And we went into a village that had been impacted by Chernobyl, and the fellow had his Geiger counter, and it's going buzz, 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 as he's going along the ground. One of the women on our delegation was, she was a lot younger than the rest of us. Maybe she was 21 or something. Actually, her name is Sonia Mosnik, and she's an amazing painter now, a watercolor. I never knew she could do it. She's absolutely marvelous. Anyhow, she didn't go with us on that particular excursion, but the friendliness and the meals and we went to another village somewhere, and they served us lunch in this big hall with these long tables and wonderful flowers and food and settings. And then we went for a walk in the woods and along the river, and they talked about picking mushrooms and all sorts of things. And one of the women said, "This is so marvelous. I wish we could just stay here. The next thing we know, we're staying for dinner." They had a different setting on the table, different dishes, different flowers, food. And then she said, "Oh, I'd love to hear some music," and a band appeared. So we danced like mad. And there was a lot of vodka. And and the people, we had It was two men that went with us, two young men who were our interpreters then. In Moscow, we had some young women. And the interpreters were smart. They knew all about this. They were dumping theirs on the floor. But our guys all weren't. Oh, it was a sad tale. I had to put one of them to bed, and you lock the door. I had to lock the door from the outside. And so in the morning, there were all these phone calls. Will somebody come in and let me out? Kind of thing. And then we were back to Moscow. But we also went to a place called Volozhna. And it was a lot of churches and a spiritual kind of place with the Russian Orthodox Church. And that's where the top fellow was, and we had the little strong coffees with him. But their priest got married. It was sort of like Roman Catholic, but it was Russian Orthodox. And so they were married and had families. And so the next year, we invited them to bring a delegation here. And so I organized places for them to go here, such as our local hospital and the maternity ward and WCB, and up to Whistler. And the mayor of Whistler was a Rotarian, and so we went to his place for a reception afterwards. We went to some greenhouses out in the valley, and we went to a dairy farm. And what the Russians were surprised about is that the cows were so round and healthy. And they were much better shape than theirs. They were very interested in all the processes that happened here. The interpreter I had in Moscow wrote to me, and so did some of the women that had come to the delegation that they brought here. And we kept in touch with one another. And the woman who lived in a place called Khabarovsk on the Amur River in eastern Siberia would write to me and said, I'm waiting for you. I am waiting for you. So I took another Russian course, and I went back with a fellow who was taking big loads of clothing and goods. And we took some medical things too. And so that was my big adventure. I went around the world in 17 days, and I took 3 Aeroflot flights, and it was my big adventure. So that was pretty marvelous. I liked it. And then, because I was spending so much time on this, how do you think my business was going along? So I saw an ad for ICBC, and so I was with them for 17 years. And the last maybe 6 years or 7 years, I was doing fraud investigation, and I just loved it. Didn't know every day what I would be faced with, and that was very, very stimulating. It was very good, and met some pretty awful people, but some pretty nice people too. And then I retired. And here I am. Now I do a newsletter for the Delta. I've joined the Delta Naturalists Society. And they're not the ones that take the clothes off. They're the ones that bird watch and think about the ecology and that kind of thing. And I do a newsletter for them. You can look it up, the Delta Naturalist Society. It's a blog. It says blog, but it's easy to find. So I do a monthly newsletter for them, and I was told, about 6 pages just to say what we're doing, what outings and stuff. And the president said, you can do whatever you like. So I do 20 to 24 pages, and they're all thrilled to bits. Put in pictures and articles, and I hope that there's something for everybody in it. So that keeps me off the streets too. So it's time to go, is it? I know. I think. Yeah, it's getting on. So that's. Sorry.
How many children were in your family?
There were 8. There were 5 girls. It was very nicely balanced. 5 girls and 3 boys. And my brother Neil died a few years ago. So there are 7 of us left. And Grant's the oldest. I'm the second oldest. Then there was Neil. Then Heather, Virginia, Steve, Lorna, and the baby Louise. So, and there was 20 years difference between the oldest and the youngest. So, yeah. Always somebody to look after, feed a child, change them, do the dishes, whatever. Yeah. So I really like to travel. What was it, 2013, I think? I spent just over 5 weeks in Italy with a friend, and that was amazing. It just made me want to go back. 5 days on Sicily, and it wasn't nearly enough. The architecture and the ruins, and we had a car and just driving. That was marvelous. And where else did I go? Spent just over 3 weeks in France and another time in Eastern Europe. My friend asked me, he said, I'm going to the Olympics in Athens. Do you want to come? So gave it a day, and I said, no, it's going to be the hottest ever, the most crowded ever, and the most expensive ever, but I've got plan B. I said, you go there, and because he said he'd get a car and, we'd drive around some of the islands. I said, you go there and then meet me in Prague. He says, yeah, I can do that. So I flew into Prague after, when he said, and so we were in Prague, and then we went to some of the spa towns, Karlovy Vary and Český Krumlov and others, and then down into Austria, and then along the river and to Vienna, dropped the car there, and then went by hydrofoil to Budapest. And that was great too, but not long enough in Budapest. I hardly got to see that. But it's always good to come home again.
Yes.
It's always good. And it makes, actually I think what travel does is make you more appreciative of where we live and how we live and the benefits, the advantages that we have here. We're really fortunate. Mm-hmm. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.